Welcome, friends, to The Hero Beside Me, the podcast that seeks to explore the professional and private lives of working dogs of all kinds. For thousands of years, humans and canines have shared a special bond and an essential partnership, which continues to grow in importance in our society today. Dogs are helping humans in a myriad of ways, performing essential tasks that only they can perform. The more we learn about them, the more endless their potential seems to be. It is my goal to document the way these amazing animals are making an indelible mark on our world with their astonishing abilities, incredible drive, insatiable zest for life, and unconditional love, which they generously bestow upon their humans. Join me as I explore the wonder of these canine heroes beside us.
Come here. Stay. All right, we're going to take a walk. We'll be back. Okay. Come on. Forward. Right. Alamo. Right. Right. Good boy. Good boy.
Listeners, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you my conversation with Michael Hingson, author, speaker, and president of the Michael Hingson Group. Michael is blind, and he's going to be talking to us about what it's like to live in partnership with a guide dog.
No, you can't go up there. Left. We're not going to that house. What we'll do is forward. Good boy. And he stops at the driveway. Alamo, right. Good boy. Come on.
Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about who you are and your story.
I've been blind my whole life. I've been using guide dogs since the age of 14. And I grew up believing that I could do whatever I choose. And in fact, the way I tend to express it now is that I believe that everyone on this planet has a disability. A few of us are light independent, and most of you are light dependent, which means that if you don't have lights around, you guys can't do much. You tend to have some problems with that. Thomas Edison invented the electric light bulb, which now is we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. We can properly describe the light bulb as a reasonable accommodation to allow light-dependent people to function in the dark. And a lot of people think I'm very just plain whimsical about that, but I'm not totally, because the reality is that all of us have challenges and all of us have gifts. The problem is that most everyone in this world has grown up believing that eyesight is the only game in town, and it is not the only game in town. The reality is blind people are as capable as other people. We may use different techniques to accomplish the same task, but we can do them. I use a guide dog, and sometimes I use a white cane, and sighted people will say, yeah, well, you have to use a guide dog and you have to use a white cane. And my response is, let's take you into an office building where there are no windows and no lights and see how well you do. The reality is that we need to recognize that eyesight is not the only game in town, and that blind people have the same right to live in the world and be included as everyone else. That's the philosophy that I grew up with from my parents and also from an organization, the National Federation of the Blind, which is the largest consumer organization of blind people in the United States. So I began using a guide dog because I was capable of traveling around in my neighborhood, but now suddenly going into high school, we felt that it would be better if I had some other tools to more efficiently and safely get around and not have problems bumping into people and so on. And for me, it ended up being a guide dog first. And so I started using a guide dog. Now, a guide dog's job is not to lead me around. Everyone talks about how the guide dog leads the blind person around. And with my story, which many people may have heard of, I worked in the World Trade Center on September 11th and escaped with my guide dog, Roselle. And I constantly, even today, see and hear reports about how the guide dog Roselle led her blind master and other people down and out of the World Trade Center. Totally 150% wrong. Guide dogs do not lead, they guide. That is to say, the dog's job is to make sure that we walk safely, we go where we're going without incident, and if there are problems along the way and the dog can't avoid an obstacle, the dog will stop until I figure out what to do and command the dog. When we're going somewhere, I need to know where to go and how to get there so that I can give the dog commands every step of the way, forward, left, right, and so on. And of course, sighted people always say, well, how do you know that? Because you're blind. And the answer is, how do you know that? Because you're sighted and the only thing you have are signs to help you. What do you do if you don't have those signs? You are as lost or not. It all depends on knowledge. And the fact is, I learn where I am going to go and how to get there. Now, of course, we have GPS, and there are talking GPS systems. And even in airports, I use a product called Aira, A-I-R-A, which is a mechanism where a sighted person watching what I do through an app on my smartphone, on my iPhone specifically, can tell me what gate we're at by the signs and so on, because airports aren't very inclusive and put information readily available to me in a form that I can read myself so that I know what gate I'm at. So I use Aira, and Aira agents read the signs. Some people will again then suddenly say, well, but they can see and you can't, so you really need them. And the answer is only because people aren't inclusive. It's really not as much about the guide dog as it is about the attitude. The dog's job is to make sure that we walk safely and that as a result, we can get where we need to go. We work as a team, and that's the most important fact that I can tell you about working with a guide dog. The guide dog and the person who they're guiding must work together as a team. We each have a job to do, and my job is to command and know where we're going. The dog's job is to make sure that we get there safely. And when we work together well, it's a great relationship.
Walk us through the process. Your dog is wearing a harness with a handle.
Right. So let's go through what actually goes on. As I said, we're a team. And the interesting thing about the guide dog person team is that, like any team, we have to build a trusting relationship. People say that dogs love unconditionally. And I think that's true, unless something conditions them out of it, like abuse and so on, which fortunately doesn't happen too often. But with a guide dog, it doesn't happen. I've heard of a couple of cases where people didn't handle dogs well, but mostly abuse isn't an issue with a guide dog person team or a person guide dog team. However, even though they love unconditionally, they do not trust unconditionally. Trust and developing a working relationship is just as important and just as much a process as people working together. It's a little bit harder with a person team because people have grown up, and because of everything going on in the world and just the way we interact, we kind of always figure the other person has a hidden agenda. Dogs don't do that. So they're open to trust when we're not. I think it takes, even so, a good year to develop a relationship with a guide dog. My current guide dog, Alamo, who is my 8th since 1964, Alamo is a black lab, and we met each other on February 11th, 2018. We started to work together. Alamo did his job extremely well. The training at Guide Dogs for the Blind is absolutely superb. They're very scientific in the way they train the dogs. They use a number of techniques, including a clicker and food rewards and other things that really tend to reinforce the behavior that they want the dogs to exhibit. Even so, by the way, the success rate at training is about 50% because, like with people that are not cut out to do jobs, not every guide dog is cut out to be a guide dog, or not every dog is cut out to be a guide dog. The training occurs and we're matched, as Alamo and I were on February 11th, and we began to work each other. But it takes a long time to get to the point where we really seamlessly know what the other is thinking and the behavior of the other person or team member in the team. So the way it works when we're guiding is that Alamo wears a harness, and there's a handle on the harness that I hold. I hold the handle and the leash. The idea behind the handle is that the dog is out in front of me and the handle is essentially down in my case, on my left side. It's a stiff mechanism, so I can feel every movement of the dog. So if the dog suddenly, even slowly, veers to the left or to the right, I know that, especially when it veers to the right, because it will push me over essentially. But I follow the movements of the dog through the harness handle. So let's say we're crossing a street and suddenly the dog stops or jerks back or pulls to the left or pushes to the right. My job is to follow the dog. I'm not going to stop in the middle of the street or anywhere necessarily and question what the dog does. My assumption is, and that's the trust, right? My assumption is that there is a reason the dog behaves as the dog does. Now, they choose dogs at Guide Dogs for the Blind because they don't get distracted easily. So my assumption is that dog is doing what it's doing for a reason. If later I discover that the dog wasn't really distracted but saw a duck and wanted to go visit, I guarantee you the team will have a meeting and one of the members of the team is going to have to answer for their behavior. That's the way I love to say it. But the reality is they don't get distracted much. And so when the dog moves, my job is to follow that dog. I have to let the dog take command of what the team is doing. Probably what's happening is that there was a hybrid car coming down the street that I didn't hear, or a very quiet car, and the dog saw it as it turned a corner or came toward us and moved me back out of the way. Likewise, my job is to know where we want to go and get there. So we cross a street, the dog trusts me to know that I know where I'm going. If I'm not confident about that, it will concern the dog, especially after we develop a trusting relationship. And the dog, Alamo or whoever, will be looking back at me, are you okay? Do you know what we're doing? Because I will act nervous if I don't know what we're doing, and most anyone would. So my job is also to move with confidence and speak with confidence and praise the dog and tell the dog they're doing a great job and so on, and tell Alamo he's doing well and encourage him. If there is a problem, Alamo's not feeling well or something, I have to learn his behavior and learn what signals he gives me to know that maybe he's got a problem. That's just the relationship that we have. We don't speak the same direct language. So communication is as much by behavior both ways as anything else. But again, when we communicate well, then the team is truly working at peak efficiency and we get done the things that we need to do. But it is important that I recognize that Alamo has a job to do and that I let Alamo do his job, and Alamo recognizes that I have a job to do and that he lets me do my job, and that we work together and respect each other's places in the team. Good boy. See, he comes up to that and stops. He wants to turn right, but he won't because that takes us out into the street. He'll wait for me to do that. Yeah, if we're crossing a street and he pulls back because he sees the car coming, he knows I want to go forward, but he has the command authority to stop that. That's what intelligent disobedience is about. And here, technically, this is the same thing. He comes up to a car, he knows I want to go forward, but he also can't just go around it like to the left, so he's going to stop and wait for direction.
So what happens if you're in a busy, crowded place?
The dogs are trained to work in crowded areas and work in and out of crowds or groups of people. And they know how to do that and judge distances when we're going somewhere. And walk us through even pretty tight spaces. If I bump into someone as we're going through, I will actually stop and ask the person, would you just stand there a minute, and we'll back up and we'll do it again to make sure that the dog recognizes that they have to clear the person. Most of the time people will do that. They think it's cute. And I'll explain why we're doing it, because I shouldn't bump into people.
Alamo's main function then is to protect you from hazards. Is that true?
Well, I don't like the word protect, not because it isn't accurate, because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. He's not a guard dog. He's not trained to protect me from people and so on. People said, well, if somebody were to attack you, would Alamo attack them or bite them? And my response when people ask that, because I don't know what their motivation is, my response is, and rightly so, I wouldn't want to be the person to try to find out. The reality is they're not trained to do it. They're not trained to be a guard dog or an attack dog. I don't want that, because if I reach out to shake your hand and Alamo, or you reach out to shake my hand and Alamo misinterprets that, I wouldn't want you to lose a hand. Now, on the other hand, the relationship we develop is very deep and very loving. And if Alamo truly felt I was endangered, I don't know what he would do. So I wouldn't want to be the person to find out. It isn't a question of training, it's a question of love. So that's why I don't like to use the word protect when we're talking about like protecting from hazards. Alamo's job is to make sure that we walk safely and we go safely. And if we come across something out of the ordinary, like an open manhole, he will either stop and wait for me to decide what to do, because he can't walk around the manhole on the sidewalk. Or let's say we're walking in a subway station. The dogs are trained by most all of the guide dog schools to stay away from the edge of the track. And when at all possible, they'll walk between me and the track. That works if they are trained to walk on my left side and we're walking with the tracks on my left. They will walk closer to the edge than I, but even so, they'll try to stay a couple of feet away. If we're walking so that my right side is closer to the edge, again, they're trained to stay away from that edge and not walk close to the edge to keep us safe. So they're trained to avoid anything that they view as a problem. And if they can't, then they stop and they wait for me to figure it out and make a decision. Another story, when we were escaping from the World Trade Center and we were running away from Tower 2 collapsing, we were engulfed in the dust cloud of the building falling down. And so I knew that we had to get out of that dust cloud. So I started telling Roselle to go right, because we were running next to a building. What I wanted to do, even though Tower 2 was coming down, a more immediate thing at that point for us was to get out of that dust cloud, because the dirt and debris and dust was so thick that I could feel it going down my throat and settling in my lungs. So I was telling Roselle, right. And I was listening for an opening, because I didn't even know if she could hear my commands or see my hand signals, because I was doing both. Well, she obviously could, because at one point suddenly I heard an opening, and obviously she knew that's what I wanted to do, was to go into that opening. She turned right, she took one step, and she stopped, and she refused to move. So I had to investigate, and discovered by sticking out a foot and reaching a hand along a wall that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. She had done exactly what she was supposed to do, and she was not going to move because we were at the top of a flight of stairs, until I discovered it and then told her that she was a good girl and said forward, and we walked down the stairs. So her job is to keep us safe. And when she can't directly do that, then she waits for me to give her an appropriate command to address it.
So their commands are forward, left, right.
Some of the basic commands are forward, left, right, halt. We used to have a command called hop up, which is to speed up and go faster. And now it's just, encouraging, let's keep going. Keep them paying attention. Occasionally I will do a short, slight tug with the leash just to make sure that the dog is focused. not a hard thing or anything like that, because the leash isn't a punishing tool. A leash is another tool for signaling and also to keep control of the dog when I'm not holding on to the harness. The harness being on the dog is the signal to the dog that it's time to work. So for example, when we're walking down the street and we're stopped somewhere and somebody comes up and says, oh, they come up and they say, oh, what a cute dog. Can I pet your dog? I will always say no. 100% of the time I'll say no. Because when that dog is in harness, I don't want anyone touching the dog. Now, if I have time, I'll say, hold on. I'll take the harness off and I'll say, now you can pet the dog. And I'll explain why. Because also the puppy dogs have to have some time to relax. And they naturally want to greet people. But I want Roselle's training about being in harness and working to absolutely be sacrosanct and to be something that we do not change from. Now, I've had a couple of cases where someone asks me and then when I say no, they continue to pet the dog anyway. And I can tell that because Roselle or any dog naturally likes contact with people when they're friendly. And they will eventually get distracted and they'll move or go toward the other person or look more their way and the dog is in harness while this is going on. I will jerk the leash. And the person, when this happened once, said, well, what are you doing that? You're jerking the leash. You should yell at me. I was petting your dog. And you said no, but I wanted to pet your dog. And I said, well, guess what? You got the dog in trouble because the dog knows better. I'll deal with the dog and then I'll deal with you. But you're not going to put my life in danger. I'm not going to let the dog get away with that. You got the dog in trouble. You know, and I don't care how much of a dog lover they are. If they don't have the respect necessary to accept what I tell them when I say they can't pet the dog, then that's going to be a problem for them because I probably won't take the harness off after that. You know, and we'll go on. And some people, I'm sure, were angry at me because I wouldn't let them pet my dog, but it's not a pet. A guide dog is not a pet. Even when the harness is off, the guide dog is not a pet. It's a member of the team. It's a member of the family. And we have to keep a close enough relationship for that to be recognized by both of us. So there are rules. But the dogs love to play, and so do I. We play a lot and all that kind of stuff. But still, there are rules. And the dogs love that. They love pack leaders. They love someone who can give them direction and tell them what they want the dog to do or what they want the dog to know.
Do guide dogs do any retrieval?
That is a good question. Do guide dogs do any fetching or retrieving? They used to be trained to do that. It is apparently not an easy thing to teach, but they used to. Like Guide Dogs for the Blind doesn't teach fetch anymore. I wish they would bring that back.
And so you've had 8 guide dogs?
I've had 8 guide dogs in, 56 years now.
I'm assuming each relationship with each dog varies a little bit.
A lot. Absolutely. Every dog has a different personality, just like people have different personalities.
So is it difficult to have to transition so relatively often?
Yes and no. Is it difficult to train with a new guide dog? Probably the hardest one was with Roselle. Roselle in 2004 became diagnosed with immune-mediated thrombocytopenia, which is a disease where the platelets in the blood are attacked by the immune system. So the blood gets very thin and won't coagulate like with a wound. Something that happens with people and dogs. She did work for 3 more years, and then she was retired for 4 years before she passed with a couple of other things along the way. But still, it was hard. But generally speaking, I don't find it to be overly difficult.
I was also wondering about the history of guide dogs, if you know anything about that.
The first guide dog school in this country was the Seeing Eye in Morristown, New Jersey, and it was formed in 1929. And by the way, some people just call all the dogs Seeing Eye dogs. They're not Seeing Eye dogs, they're guide dogs. This first school was the Seeing Eye that produces Seeing Eye dogs. Seeing Eye dogs are part of the collective group known as guide dogs. seeing I as a brand, like Coke is a brand. So when you get 7-Up, you don't say, I'm having a Coke. You say, I'm having a 7-Up. They're all colas or uncolas or whatever. They're all soft drinks. But it started in Europe before then, and I don't know exactly when in the 1800s it began. Typically, German Shepherds were used. Now, most all of the schools have gone away from using German Shepherds for a variety of reasons. There are still some blind people who are adamant that they want a German Shepherd, and I wish that people wouldn't be quite that close-minded. They won't go to a school that doesn't do German Shepherds. Shepherds are very dedicated dogs when they become guide dogs. They're very committed. They guide well. They're very volitional. They know exactly what they want to do, and what they want, and they know what people want them to do. They're very crisp in their work if they become a guide dog. Here's the problem. I mentioned that not every dog is cut out to be a guide dog. Labradors and the cross between the Lab and the Golden make the best guide dogs overall today, and their success rate is only about 50% because a lot of dogs are just too easily distracted. They just don't work well enough. They don't pick up on the training, whatever. Shepherds, the training success rate among good schools that truly deal with all that's expected of a guide dog, the success rate is maybe about 25 to 27%. It's lower. And so some of the schools have decided that they're not going to do Shepherds anymore. And the other thing is that if a dog doesn't make it as a guide dog and they're what we call career changed, oftentimes the dogs are adopted out. Well, they've gone through some training. They're a pretty well-trained dog. Shepherds have a much harder time being adopted. And the longer they're in the kennels, the more aggressive they become. So schools are recognizing that in a lot of cases, it's just not the best decision to have Shepherds. The way I put it is, if you truly, and schools works very scientifically in terms of breeding to traits, right? And so they try to breed out of labs the desire to go into the water and so on. And they do that by observing the dogs, and the ones that tend to do the best of the best become breeders, and they breed to those traits. But the fact of the matter is that if you breed a German Shepherd to the traits of being a guide dog rather than being a herding dog, you're breeding out of a lot of what makes a Shepherd a Shepherd. And so several of the schools don't, or they do very few Shepherds because it's just harder to make them guide dogs. Golden Retrievers have a lot of skin allergies and so on, so their success rate isn't as high. But one of the things that schools started doing was crossing the Lab and the Golden. And you kind of get the best of all worlds there sometimes, and they become pretty successful. And Labs also are pretty successful. They're both about 50% success rate.
You mentioned that you're a speaker, and you also wrote a New York Times bestseller called Thunderdog about your experiences on 9/11. Do you want to give us a summary of that day?
So the book was a #1 New York Times bestselling book called Thunderdog, the story of a blind man, his guide dog, and the triumph of trust. And it's still available. So very briefly, because I hope people will buy it. Poor starving author, we need people to buy books. I worked as the Mid-Atlantic region sales manager for a computer company. And on that day, I'd been hired to open the office for Quantum in New York City, and we opened it on the 78th floor of Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. And so on that day, we were conducting sales seminars to teach some of our reseller partners how to sell our products. And at 8:45 in the morning, we were getting close to being ready to start the first seminar of the day when suddenly we felt the building lurch. And then it literally began to tip. And the way I describe it is, imagine taking a spring and fastening it to a table and then pushing on the top part of the spring. The leaves of the spring expand. And that's exactly what the tower was. It was a big spring. The buildings are made flexible with expansion joints that can withstand being buffeted in winds and actually being hit by an airplane, like an airplane hit the Empire State Building in the 1940s because it got lost in a fog bank. They're made to be flexible so that they won't break and tip over, even if there's a strong wind or something like that. Well, the building tipped, and when it became vertical, I had been standing in the doorway. Roselle was under my desk, and a colleague, David Frank, who was back for the day. The three of us were in my office. We had some guests in our conference room. As soon as the building stopped moving, I went back into my office from standing in the doorway. You know, building moves, go stand in doorway, right? Rules are changed a little bit, but that's how I grew up in earthquake country. Went back into the office and met Roselle coming out from under my desk. I took her leash. I said heel, which meant to come around on my left side and to sit. She did that, and about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet because the expansion joints were going back to their normal configuration. Now, I had spent a lot of time learning how to travel around the World Trade Center, learning where things were, and actually trying to create new ways to go from, say, the subway station or some places in the building to my office, because I didn't want Roselle to ever get into the habit of going one way to get to the office, because I don't want her to think that she knows how I want to go. And then we have to have a fight about, no, I don't want to go that way today. I want to go this way. I want her not to anticipate. And that got to be a little bit hard in the World Trade Center because there are only so many ways to go. But I learned what to do in an emergency. I learned where everything was in the complex so that I was totally confident. Also, as the leader of the office, it was my responsibility to know and to be able to deal with anyone who was in our office and be the guy who could make sure that we did what we needed to do to get people out. I didn't need to see to do that. I needed to know the information. Example, after the building stopped moving, I heard sounds outside our window. David, after the building stopped moving, turned and looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. We got to get out of here right now." And I kept saying to David, "Slow down. We'll evacuate, but we got to do it in an orderly way." "No, the building's on fire. We can't stay here. We got to get out right now." And our guests started to scream and started moving toward the exit from our conference room where they had been having early breakfasts that we got for them. And I kept saying, "Slow down, David." And I think then they stopped because they heard me saying, "Slow down." And finally, David used what I call the big line. "You don't understand. You can't see it." And the problem wasn't what I couldn't see, because David was telling me what he saw. So I knew what he saw. He said he saw millions of pieces of paper falling outside our window. That was the sounds that I had heard. He said the building was on fire above us and there was fire and smoke. Okay, I believed all that. So I knew all that. The problem wasn't what I wasn't seeing. It was what David wasn't seeing. I knew Roselle very well. We had been working together for some 22 months by that time. Remember, I said it takes a good year to get to the point where we know each other, but we did know each other extremely well. I even knew what she was like when she was afraid, because she didn't like thunderstorms. She would shake and shiver and just pant and not know what to do. She wasn't exhibiting fear, and David wasn't observing that. So because of Roselle's actions, I knew that at that instant in time, we weren't immediately being threatened. You've probably read about dogs that save their humans because of the fact that the dogs smelled smoke and fire in the home before the humans knew it, and they got their people out. Roselle wasn't doing any of that. She was sitting next to me, wagging her tail and yawning, going, "Who woke me up?" So the bottom line is that I was very aware that whatever was going on wasn't imminent in terms of putting us in danger. I finally got David to focus and said, "Get our guests to the stairs." Another example of the teamwork between the two of us. Well, so we did what we needed to do. David took our guests to the stairs. I called my wife, and then we went to the stairs and started down. Roselle guided part of the time. That is, I was holding on the harness. There's not a lot of magic to walking down the stairs. At the top of a flight of stairs, she'd stop until I say forward, and we'd start going down the stairs. What a good dog, Roselle, good girl. And we get to the bottom, and she would walk off the stairs, and I could tell that there were no more stairs because the harness would level out. And then I would tell her to turn, and we would go down the next flight of stairs, and so on. It's not hard once you know what the process is. It's no harder for me than for you. There were times on the stairs when the crowd was so heavy and people were so compacted together that she couldn't guide. So she actually walked at heel slightly behind me, and I held on to the left-hand stair rail to go down the stairs. But we worked together, and we made it down and out. And when we got outside, David saw fire in Tower 2, and we didn't know what caused it. We didn't know what happened to us other than he saw fire. We assumed an airplane hit the building because after we started down, I began smelling an odor, and other people were smelling it. We couldn't figure out what it was because it wasn't something that we would ever have associated with being in the World Trade Center. Namely, once we figured it out, and I think I figured it out first and mentioned it to other people, I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. And they went, yeah, that's what it is. We must have been hit by an airplane, but we had no details. So we got down, we got out, and and we escaped. It wasn't that it was miraculous, although people think it was because, well, how could a blind person do all that? The reality is the team worked well. There have been a lot of stories, myths about dogs that were way up in the building with people and they saved a bunch of people. Then they went back in and they saved more people and all that. All that stuff is false. There's no such thing. None of that happened. There were 2 blind people with guide dogs fairly high in the building, and we both made it out.
You were 78 floors up?
I was 78th, and Omar with his guide dog Salty was on 71.
Wow.
A lot of stairs.
After that experience, did you feel like you and Roselle were even closer?
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, we had to be. I especially appreciated the fact that the teamwork was incredible that day. But it was also what I would expect to happen. For me, people would say, well, you must have been really afraid. And the answer was no. And that brings up another point about not being afraid. Again, I knew what to do. And actually, every day I went into the complex, I thought to myself, well, what are we going to do if there's an emergency today? So it became a mindset. So I learned to control those fears. And so I didn't panic going down. In fact, in a very volitional way, I kept encouraging Roselle, you're doing a great job. Good girl, keep going. And people told me later, in emails, even years later, how they followed us down the stairs because we clearly were very calm and we weren't worried. So they followed us down the stairs and out. For 19 years, I've been a speaker and I've talked about what happened that day. And over the summer in the world of our pandemic environment, I realized that what I hadn't done was do anything to teach others how to control fear. People said, well, you've inspired us and all that, so we understand blind people more and all that. Well, yes and no. But I never taught people how to do that. I never taught people how to control their fears, how to get beyond unexpected life changes. And of course, the pandemic is as much an unexpected life change as any of us could have. So I've begun to develop and will be releasing over the next month a program called Blinded by Fear. And I call it that very deliberately because people become blinded when their fears overtake them and they can't make decisions. They can't see their way forward. They are literally blinded and they become totally immersed in their fears and don't know what to do with themselves. There are still people today who won't fly because of what happened on September 11th, even though the likelihood of an airplane being hijacked is a whole lot lower than the likelihood of them being in some sort of an incident with an automobile or any number of other things that can happen. So we're developing a coaching program that'll be a one-on-one and some other materials, but a one-on-one coaching program that people can subscribe to, and we'll help them learn how to control their fears and be able to move on from them. So if people want to know more about that, they will be able to go to my website, michaelhingson.com, and also eventually we'll be activating blindedbyfear.net that people will be able to go to as well and learn about the program. And if they feel that they need some assistance in understanding their own fears and moving forward from them, then we'll be teaching that.
That's awesome. And we'll definitely put that info in the show notes.
Appreciate that.
What, if anything, has partnering with guide dogs over the years taught you about yourself or life in general?
I think that for me, I've learned that I can create teams. I constantly tell people, you've heard of books like The 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard and all the great sales gurus and so on, Tony Robbins and so on. In reality, I think I've learned more about teamwork and forming teams and developing teams by working with 8 guide dogs than I've ever learned from all the sales experts that ever were and ever will be. Because we not only have to learn to appreciate each other and understand each other's languages, if you will, but we are forced to work together to develop a team with 2 completely different kinds of creatures and make the team work. What happened on September 11th is always going to be something that will be a part of me. And while everyone, almost everyone, keeps asking me, well, what were you doing in the World Trade Center? And they're going, you're blind. How could you be in there? That isn't the issue. The issue is what got me to the World Trade Center. And it's all the things that we've talked about today. And what do we learn from it? Teamwork works. The reality is I survived in part because of Roselle, and I survived because of my understanding of how to function as a blind person. I have survived because I have the confidence that allowed me to work hard in advance to know what I needed to know in order to survive. A lot of that comes from working with a guide dog, to recognizing that there is so much value in trust. And so when I speak, I constantly tell people that we may not trust others immediately, and we shouldn't. There's nothing wrong with not trusting someone, but at least be open to the idea of trust. Convey the message that you really want to develop a trusting relationship with them, which means that they have to earn your trust, but you also have to earn their trust. And that's fair. If you can't do that, then you're not going to have a trusting relationship with people. But the reality is that trust is all around us, and it's also so much under attack. It's something that we do need to deal with. Right now, our leaders in Washington aren't doing a lot to earn trust, and they're not trying to earn trust, which is extremely unfortunate. Some are, but some aren't. And the reality is that's going to hurt our country if we don't turn that around. Trust is a very important thing. Teamwork is a very important thing. And the fact of the matter is that we can make teams work if we choose to do it. So I've learned those lessons from working with 8 guide dogs, and I'm sure I'll learn more over time.
I mean, you've already informed those of us who don't know much about blindness. You've taught us a lot today, but is there anything else that you would like to teach?
I think the most important thing that I can tell you is that there's really no difference between blind people and sighted people, other than we're going to do things a little bit differently than you. I don't buy into any of the issues about one race is better than another race. I'm not a racist. I don't believe that it's my right to say what someone else can and can't do. All of us have gifts. I don't buy the fact that we should be discriminating against people because of their color. That's a handicap all of you guys have. And if there are blind people who have that prejudice, they've learned it from sighted people who deal with color, which is extremely unfortunate sometimes. Just recognize that we're the same as the rest of you. We all have our gifts that we have. Hopefully we learn what they are and know how to use them. And some people do and some people don't, blind or sighted. But we're here on this earth and we're as capable as you. The unemployment rate among employable blind people right now is 65%. It's not that we can't work, it's that people think we can't work. The National Federation of the Blind is working constantly, not only to help secure legislation to address some of those issues, but to educate the public about blindness and blind people. And if you want to learn more, go to www.nfb.org, and you will learn a lot about blindness there. But, the fact is, I can't really teach you about blindness any more than you can teach me what it's like to see. If I ask you to describe to me what the color red looks like, you can talk about fire engines, you can talk about it being a hot color, but that doesn't tell me what red looks like. That doesn't tell me what's the sensation that you feel when you see, or that you see when you see red, any more than I can describe to you, or you can describe to me what it really means to hear. Now, the fact of the matter is that as a sighted person, if you really want to have some idea of what it's like to be a blind person in the world today, don't put on a blindfold and try to go do something, because you won't know how to do it. You don't have the training to do it. Organizations have tried that. They try dining in the dark, or they say, go put on a blindfold and go try to cook something. And you'll see what it's like for a blind person. No, you won't. Because we got training, just like you got training as sighted people, as to how to see and do things. You learned how to tie your shoes if you tie your shoes, because you could see people doing that. I learned little different ways, but I learned. The fact of the matter is, you can't just put on a blindfold and say, oh my God, how horrible that is, and have a true image of blindness. If you really want to see how people view blind people in the world, go find a white cane somewhere, put on a pair of dark glasses, don't put on a blindfold, walk down the street and look at how people observe you and how they behave around you. You will be very surprised at how you're really avoided in so many different ways. If you really want to do it, then get a blind person to train you on how to use a cane and then go do it. Because you can walk with great confidence, but people avoid you and they look at you funny. And because you're different than they are, and we don't truly teach our children and ourselves how to deal with difference. And again, that gets back to using a guide dog. So people seem to think that because I have a guide dog and the dog sees, that I'm a little bit more normal, but then they still want to pet the dog and they don't understand that issue. The fact of the matter is, it isn't about blindness. It's really more about the poor attitudes and misconceptions that people have who can see. And that's what really needs to change. And it's something that we all have to work on. But we're all in the same world, and we really need to learn to live together and work together and accept each other for what we can do. And each of us needs to accept each other and what we can't do.
That is so wise. Thank you for sharing. Well, Michael, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and candor, and for being on the show. Well,
thank you. And again, if people want to learn more, they're welcome to go to www.michaelhingson.com, www.michaelhingson.com. And hopefully by the time this is up, we will have blindedbyfear.net also available, but it will also be on the website. So if people go to michaelhingson.com, they can send me a message through our contact form, and they'll certainly then be notified when Blinded by Fear does become active, and they'll see it on the website as well. They won't have to go to blindedbyfear.net. They can also see it on michaelhingson.com. But you're welcome. I hope people will get Thunderdog. We also wrote another book called Running with Roselle, which was intended for children. It's, again, a narrative. It's not really a picture book. But more adults buy it than kids. It talks more about me growing up as a blind boy and Roselle growing up and how we met and so on. So it's not really as much at all about the World Trade Center, but just our relationships and so on. So it's pretty educational, and you can get that through Amazon. It was self-published and is available. So both of those are available if anybody is interested.
Yes, and I have read Thunderdog, and it is wonderful, so I highly recommend.
Oh, great. I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or a number of other platforms. As I mentioned earlier, I'm your host, Shauna T. I'm a professional photographer, and I'm currently working on a photography project about working dogs. If you would like information about this project, please visit herobeside.me and sign up for the newsletter. Again, that's herobeside.me. Thanks so much. See you next time.